Hi y'all, welcome back to another week of online learning. Today's video is going to be focused on your project. So your project slides are due midnight on Thursday, and I wanted to give you some whole class feedback on question number 3 from your project. So reading through all of your work, it was obvious that question number 3 was really challenging for everyone. So I wanted to quickly model how I would go about answering this question as a student. So question number 3 asks you, what is the average American doing at this stage in life? And to compare this to 1 to 2 other cultures around the world. So just want to show you an example of how most people tended to answer. This is Fernando, Manny, and Bridget's project. They wrote, looking at this question here, they wrote, the average American is married, has had kids, is living with their spouse. Their age range is 20s to 30s. They are also not in school, have an average income above $67,000 and an average savings of about $120,000. The average British person is married, not in school, has an average income of £19,000 and an average saving of £4,511. Okay. So they did something that's really reasonable, which is they looked up some basic statistics about what someone would be doing at that age. Are they married? Are they in school? Are they working? What's their average income? What's their average savings? I think they did a good job. The one thing, and you can see in the comment I gave them, it's not super interesting for me as like the audience member listening to the presentation to hear American culture contrasted with British culture because they're pretty similar culturally. So as you're comparing different cultures, just think about maybe some cultures that are more different, so you can get some kind of like interesting discussion and contrast in your presentation. Here, this is Eddie's group. Here's their answer to this question. Before their teenage years, teens focused on school, play, and gaining approval from their parents. But now those former goals are replaced with independence as teenagers work towards becoming young adults. During adolescence, teenagers develop emotionally, cognitively, and physically to grow as people, which is typically with all the teens around this age. Okay, so they kind of missed they described what the average American is doing. They kind of missed the part where they're contrasting culturally. So many people answered something like this where they just missed the piece of contrasting with another culture. So to model for you how I would answer this here on this document, I'm going to model this for 2 different age groups. I'm going to start with the elderly, and then I'll go to like a younger age group because it is going to be a little bit different. So thinking about someone who's older than 60, what is the average American doing, and compare this to 1 to 2 other cultures around the world. So I think the first thing that's helpful is to think about some milestone that happens in this age range, and then we can look up some statistics, and then from there we can kind of extrapolate, or we can kind of guess based on those statistics. So a lot of this is kind of a little bit of guesswork, which is why it's a challenging question to answer and why I wanted to model it. So for me, I know that like a milestone for an older person is retirement. So when someone old stops working, and I know that this is a big deal from my grandparents and old people, that they look forward. Many of them look forward to this opportunity to retire, and then to do other things other than work. So what I'm going to look up, and again, this is hard because we're thinking about average. Obviously, there are individual differences in like when people retire or if people get to retire, but we're just thinking about like the average American here. So what I did is I Googled the average retirement age in US, or actually this isn't the average, this is the age that you can legally retire. Legally meaning like you get Social Security benefits. So basically other people's tax money goes towards supporting you in your retirement. And in the US, that is 66 years and 2 months old. And it's the same for men and women. So I didn't realize this, but in a lot of countries, there's different retirement ages for men and women, which kind of tells you something interesting about from a sociological perspective, like how the culture views men and women. But in the US, we say both men and women can start getting their benefits. They can retire at the age of about 66 years old. Okay, and that's for the current elderly population. Then for me, I was interested in Russia. My dad is from Russia, so I was just interested in comparing with Russia, and you can choose a country for any reason for your personal interest. So here in Russia, there's 2 different retirement ages. For men, it's 60, and for women, it's 55. This is super interesting because it's a lot younger than the US, especially for women. It's more than 10 years younger you get to retire. Also, it's interesting that women can retire younger than men because women tend to live longer than men. So it's interesting. You'd think it would be the opposite. But it's an interesting, cultural reason, I'm sure, that they have decided that for some reason maybe they think of women as being, more frail in their old age or something. So they have to retire earlier. I don't know. So that's one interesting thing I could talk about. Let me see. I don't know if it's worth... I'll just type out my answer. You can obviously fast forward through this part of the video and to see what I write at the end. Okay. So, it's not really the average. Say the retirement age in the United States is about 66 years old for both men and women. So there's a cultural difference. Elderly people in Russia are less likely to be working than elderly people in the US. Another thing I was thinking about, and this actually comes from a book I read a while ago called Being Mortal, is in different cultures, there's different opinions about if old people should live with their extended family or if old people should live in a nursing home. So actually, I don't have this book anymore. I gave it to my grandfather. But this is a summary of what the book is about. And let's see if I can find. Okay. So I think this paragraph kind of sums up the book well. So the tremendous success of modern healthcare, the infections that once killed most of us have been subdued, and the diseases that even a few decades ago killed us in our 60s and 70s, cancer, heart disease, stroke, and emphysema, don't know what that is, are increasingly treatable. It is now common to live into your 80s and even 90s, ages that in human history have been the exception rather than the rule. We know how to prolong the life of the body, but we still have little idea how to slow the aging process or prolong the life of the mind. Even for those who avoid dementia, the weakness and frailty of extreme old age bring a reliance on others that often requires admission to a nursing home. So, elderly people, at least in the United States, tend to live in nursing homes, and they live longer than they ever did before because of advances in medicine that allow at least the physical body to live on, even if, people are declining cognitively and don't have as high a quality of life. So let me summarize that. I'll just say in countries like the US, technology led to So basically in the book they talk about like how elderly people are seen as like a burden on their families for many people who live in the US. So they go to live in these nursing homes, which is actually kind of similar to the orphanages that you guys learned about in your lessons on last week, in the sense that they can be these institutions that can be a little bit cold and unfeeling and don't really feel very like a nurturing place to age and grow old and eventually die. So it was basically comparing that to cultures where elderly people live with their extended family, and it was saying that elderly people who live with their extended family tend to have much like richer, better experiences into old age, because they, even after they can't work anymore, after they retire, they still have this like meaning and this meaning that's brought to them through connection with their family, and they're like, you know, respected as like an elder in their family, and they still have that connection to keep them excited about life. So in cultures where in the book they mainly talk about India because the author is Indian, such as India, So that's an idea. There's obviously not a formula here to follow, but that's an idea of what a cross-cultural comparison could look like. How, even though we're in psychology and we're talking about the age of 60s to elderly, and we're talking about the developments at that time, we're also thinking with a sociological lens. So we're thinking about how different culture can have an impact on how we see aging, or how we see a certain age. So I'm not gonna do the same thing, so it takes too long for the other ones. But I could give you some quick pointers. So say you're thinking about like teens, I would start to look at statistics like high school graduation rates. If you compared high school graduation rates in Malaysia, for example, to the high school graduation rates in the US, you would see differences. So from there you could extrapolate that the average teenager might not be in school, or what the average teenager might be doing other than school. Like maybe they tend to be working, where in the US the average teenager tends to be in school. You could look at a group did this actually. Susie's group looked at teen pregnancy rates to see how likely it was that teenagers would be pregnant. Another good thing to look at could be like marriage age, so the average age of marriage. And then for birth to 2 to 3 years old, or like any of the younger groups, I would look at like what the parents are doing. So think about like, are parents working? You can look up things like paternity and maternity leave. So essentially, like, for example, Mr. Lieberneck just had a baby, and he was granted a certain amount of paternity leave. So that means that his son Fletcher was living at home with a parent full-time while Mr. Lieberneck was on paternity leave. So you could look up some statistics about this and see if babies are living with their parents or not. Hopefully that gives you some ideas. Bye, guys.